Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this month for Side by Side Digital. I'm your host, Rebecca Shively. We've got a great program lined up for you today. This month, we're talking about what it takes to build your business's trusted advisors and to keep them aligned to help you move forward towards your goals. We know it takes a village to farm, and your team is important for your success. We're joined today by Bobby Reifenrath, farm marketing consultant at Hurley and Associates. Bobby is going to walk us through some best practices when it comes to building your team and uniting them towards your success and your future goals. Bobby, thanks for being here. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rebecca, and good afternoon, everyone. So we'll get started here. Like Rebecca mentioned, we are going to be talking about building and unifying that team around your business, and so those businesses' trusted advisors. And so I want to give you guys a little bit about myself first. Originally from Wynot, Nebraska, grew up in very northeastern Nebraska on a corn, soybean, and cow-calf operation. Mom and dad still farm, still involved in the operation, and farm right up along the Missouri River. And so when I was in high school or early college years, I remember asking Dad, I'm interested in coming back to the operation, but what can I go learn? Dad was a mechanic by trade, does well at the agronomy side, the logistics side. And so if you can imagine, Dad said, I hate marketing. He said, go figure that piece out. And so that kind of led me down a path of figuring out what marketing really meant to the farm. I fast-tracked that a few years and landed with Hurley and Associates. And so for those that aren't familiar with Hurley, we've been around since the late 80s. We've got 35 years of service to farmers at this point, 7 offices throughout the central United States, and we've got about 90 teammates across those locations that are able to service the producers that we work with. And so obviously in the line of work that we do on the marketing side, building a relationship with Farm Credit over the years, and really found out that Farm Credit really likes to focus on education of their producers, and that's something that we focus on as well. So Rebecca had approached me about doing a webinar for the Side by Side Digital series. And so as a company, something that we really focus on, our kind of central focus, is to help our clients achieve that economic stability while maintaining the dignity and value of the farm family. And so if you can imagine, over the last few years, there were some potential roller coasters in the farming sector. And so really helping guys sort through what does that mean and how to make those business-minded decisions. And so this afternoon, we're going to talk about a few different things. First thing we're going to talk about is, what is the risk? What is the risk of having a team that's maybe a little bit disjointed or not unified as that team? Secondly, I'll give you guys some examples of the opportunity that a unified team does bring. We'll talk a little bit about understanding who is on your business's team, as well as finding something central to kind of rally around and really connecting that team. And then we'll finish off the afternoon here with a little call to action for you guys. And so the first thing I want to walk through is just a few examples. So I put 3 example farmers up here. So we're going to have farmer A, B, and C. And one metric that might be measured on the farm would be yield, right? We might look at what is that corn yield that we're shooting for. And so you can see with these 3 farmers, there's really 3 separate yields. I've got a 175, a 200, and a 225. Now, if I looked at this from purely an agronomist lens, I might say, you know what, I want to shoot for that 225 bushel corn. That's the best yield that of any of these producers. However, we know there's more to the story, right? A second piece of information that might fall in there would be their sales price, right? What did I generate for revenue? And so maybe your marketing consultant for your operation is focused on this revenue piece and looking at what is that sales price. So again, you can see 3 separate outcomes here. So farmer A at 675, farmer B at 635, and farmer C at 695. And so again, you might choose, boy, I really want to be farmer B with 695. But again, we know that's not the full story to your business. The other piece that's missing here is that cost of production. And so again, looking at these 3 example farmers, and now you can see from a different lens, maybe this is potentially how your lender looks at it from a cost of production standpoint. And farmer A at 650, farmer B at 590, and farmer C at 670. In reality, we all know that when we're running a farm, we're really focused on income minus expense, right, to generate that profit for the operation. And so really where we all need to rally is this final number, this cash surplus or profit type of number, and what does that mean for your operation? And so this gives you an idea of potentially, if you have 3 different lenses that you look at this from, the agronomist, the marketer, and the lender, you might have 3 different goals. However, if we're all looking at the same goal, the cash surplus per acre, now we're all working in the same direction. And so I want to give you guys 2 different examples. So I talked about the example of what's the risk of a disjointed team. So I figured the best way to demonstrate this would be to tell a little bit of a story. And so we're going to take a step back. We're going to go back to August of 2020. If anybody remembers August of 2020, kind of coming out the tail end of COVID, had some relatively low prices in the commodities and livestock as well. And so working with a producer in August of 2020, you can imagine we're a couple months from harvest here, and they still had all of their 2019 soybean crops sitting in the bin and unpriced. Okay, we knew that there was a good crop coming. By August, we were through pollination that year, had a little more rain than what we've probably seen the last couple of years, and we knew we had that big crop coming. And so we knew we were going to have to do something to generate some bin space. Additionally, this producer, as many were in that time frame, was sitting pretty tight on working capital. And so there were some actions that were taken in August of 2020, and the action that was taken is we priced and shipped all of the 2019 beans. And then we got to harvest and we realized we were going to have a big enough corn crop that we were going to need all of that storage for our corn. And so now all of a sudden we ended up shipping all of the 2020 soybeans as well. So let's look at this from a few different lenses. What were the outcomes? Well, in December of 2020, the lender sits down with this producer, they update their balance sheet, and they realize their balance sheet actually moved backwards. Again, think about August of 2020. Prices were probably lower than what they were when we valued those bushels the prior December. And so the balance sheet took a step backward as we moved those prices from unrealized to realized prices on those soybeans. And so the lender actually asked this producer to leave the bank because of their balance sheet moving backwards. Looking at it from a different lens, they sat down with their accountant and their accountant said, you have excess revenue in 2020. Remember the story, we sold all of our 2019 and all of our 2020 soybeans in that calendar year. And so their accountant's advice for them was you need to go ahead and spend $300,000 before the end of the year to get you into a tax bracket that we want you in. And so then from a third lens, looking at from a marketing standpoint, remember we talked that 2020 crop was a really good crop, big corn crop, good soybean crop. And so their cash flow, their accrual base for 2020 crop actually showed a profit. And so now think about if you're the farmer sitting in this chair. You've got your lender telling you your balance sheet moved backwards and you need to leave the bank. You've got an accountant that's telling you that you need to go spend $300,000 in the next 30 days. And you've got a marketer that's telling you that you're actually showing a profit on your operation. And so you can imagine this puts a producer in a potentially really difficult position to make good decisions. And so it shows you guys a pretty clear picture of that risk of having a disjointed team where these three individuals plus the farmer were not able to communicate and shoot for those same goals. And so I'll flip that around a little bit and I'll talk about what is there to gain. What is there to gain if I can unify my business as trusted advisors? Again, the easiest way to talk about this is probably to tell a story. And so we'll go back a little bit more recent history. And I want to talk about January of 2023. So in January of 2023, I had the opportunity to sit down with a farm. This farm has 5 family shareholders. So there's 4 brothers plus dad, all working on the farm. And so in January of 2023, we were able to sit down on farm with all 5 shareholders, myself as the marketing consultant, and then also their lender sat in on that meeting. And because of all the players that were at that meeting, we were able to not only update their balance sheet, we could also update that budgeted cash flow for the upcoming 2023 crop, and we could put that market plan together. Additionally, at this meeting, it came out that their neighbor had offered to sell them a bin site within the next 3 years. And so there were some actions that were taken. So because of who was there, we were able to project, remember we're sitting in January, we were able to project what that working capital could look like come the end of the year. And then we were able to determine what type of goal we needed to set to generate those additional down payment dollars for that bin site. And so the outcomes for everybody were a lot different than the first story I told. The outcomes here, the lender was able to adjust their cash flow timing needs. So again, think about if you go from having no storage to having a bunch of storage on the farm, that's going to change when cash is coming into the operation. And so restructuring some loan payments and things like that to match those timing needs. Additionally, the lender was able to increase their hedging line of credit. So again, consider if we were able to run a projection that could get us to our goal, we may need to take a really conservative approach to our marketing, meaning that we need to take risk off the table. And so we might need the lender support on the hedging line of credit side to be able to use the appropriate tool to do that. And so then from a marketing standpoint, we were able to create a market plan that reached that goal. We were able to break it down. If I recall correctly, we needed to generate about $600,000 of excess profit basically over the next 3 years. So we broke down a $200,000 goal per year, and we were able to create a market plan for the 2023 crop, as well as look at those multiple year projections. Look out to that 24 crop and that 25 crop to see if we could get to a point that we were able to generate those dollars needed to make that down payment on the bin site. And so you can see kind of a lot different approach here, right? We've got more of the teammates sitting in the same room. We're all now united around the same goal, in this case, offering, having the ability to purchase that bin site. And so now, all of a sudden, we're all able to head towards the same destination, and all of us can kind of pull the levers that are in our toolbox to make that happen. And so that gives you a little bit of an example to set the stage of what is the risk of a disjointed team, and then what is the opportunity that you have with a unified team. And so I want to shift gears here a little bit and just talk about who is on that team, right? Who could potentially be on that farmer's team. And so to give you guys some examples here, again, these are just examples. Your team could have more or less than this, but you might have an agronomist, probably a lender, a marketing consultant. There could be an accountant, a mechanic. There might be some employees on the farm, and probably an insurance agent that's participating as well. And so my challenge for you guys today, my first challenge is to ask you this question. Number one, who is currently on my team? So think about those people that you rely on to help you make better and better decisions for the operation, and make a list. Who is on my roster and who is on that team? Secondly, I ask you the question of, is there a seat at that table that's empty? If you were to pull your whole team together and sit around your kitchen table, would there be a seat that's empty that needs filled? And then number three, asking the question of, is there a seat at that table that needs replaced? Is there somebody on your roster that you think there might be a better fit out there for you? And think about how you could go about making sure you have the best team surrounding your operation. And so once you identify the team, the goal is to really find something to rally around. And so this is a really easy example that I use with a lot of my producers. And the first thing I usually tell them is pull out your cell phone. And when you pull out your cell phone, let's say you're going on vacation. So you pull out your app, your GPS app, and the first thing that app is going to ask you is it's going to say, where are you going, right? It needs to know what is your destination. The second thing that app needs to know is it needs to know, where am I starting, right? Where am I starting from? And then the third thing it's going to do is it's going to plot that route to get there, right? What is my planned route to get from where I'm starting to where I'm going? And so think about this in terms of marketing, right? What if we never put that destination in there? What if we don't have that goal? What if we don't know where we're going? In terms of your vacation, you're probably not going to get to where you want to go if you never put that destination in there. And so marketing is really no different, and moving your farm forward is really no different. And so the key here is that if we all know where we're going and we all know where we're starting, now we can all follow the same route to get there, right? We can all work towards that same goal. And so the question is, do other teammates know those goals? Or number two, are there goals that other teammates have for you that are unspoken, that maybe need to be shared? Maybe your lender has a working capital goal for you, or your agronomist has a yield goal for you. And how do we pull that in so that we can all work in the same direction? And so a lot of times when I show this, I'll get questions of, that sounds great, but that sounds really pie in the sky. So can we break that down a little bit more? And of course we can. And so when we look at this as a company, what we break it down to is two different types of goals. The first one is operational goals. So operational goals are going to be those things that are a little bit bigger picture, kind of that overarching aspirational goal. Typically, they're a little bit longer term, and it may be hard to tie a dollar amount to them. And so, for example, I might have an operational goal of bringing somebody back into the farm. I might have an operational goal of reducing stress. I'll give you an example. I sat down with a producer last week, and he told me his goal was peace of mind, right? He was struggling to sleep at night because he wasn't sure where his farm sat. And so that's something we could work towards, was that peace of mind. Additionally, there might be a longer term goal to add land in the future. And so if you're thinking about, how do I come up with my own operational goals, ask yourself this question: what does your operation look like in 5 years? Or what does your operation look like in 10 years? And start from there. Additionally, then we break those operational goals down into financially, what do we want to do this year to work towards those? And so a financial goal is typically going to have a defined dollar amount. They're going to be a lot shorter term. And so it could be something like upgrading equipment. It could be a goal to build working capital. That's a very common goal that I see, especially among like a young and beginning producer. It could have a goal to prepay some expenses or prepay some debt. And so this really creates that target for us to shoot for every single year and really build towards those operational goals. And so you can think about this by asking yourself the question of, what are 2 things I would do if I had a successful year this year? And can I start working toward those today instead of waiting until December to determine if I did have a successful year or if I did not? And so I'll give you guys some examples of really what this looks like. And so I look back through a few producers, tried to pick those that were maybe in a similar camp as some of you. Think about that young and beginning producer and what they had for goals or what they had for identity statements that we've kind of rallied around on the farm. And so the first example I'll give you, his identity statement is to have financial and temporal freedom. And so think about that. I think the way he actually worded it was, give me a healthy 401k and have somebody pay my insurance, put me on an island, and I'll retire tomorrow. Right? That is his kind of identity statement for his operation. Now, there's some shorter terms to help us work towards that, and maybe a little bit more practical financial terms of we needed to upgrade the planter, wanted to improve production record keeping, and also wanted to purchase a sprayer. Longer term, kind of that operational goal was to purchase the family farm. And so one other thing that was unique about this producer when I went back and looked at our goals is that we had listed out a board of directors. And so I caveat that a little bit by saying this producer is young and beginning, farming about 400 or 500 acres, and they still have a list of board of directors. Now, that's not an official board that you would have at maybe a big corporation, but they know who they lean on for decision making. To give a second example, another producer that I work with, their identity statement was to be a self-sustained crop and cattle system. And so if you think about what that means, if we were to increase the cattle side, we probably need to increase our acres as well to run an efficient manure management program. And so that was their identity statement. Additionally, this producer was extremely focused on operational efficiency, right? Can I buy a tractor that can complete 4 tasks instead of a tractor for each task? In the shorter term, some things they were shooting for was we wanted to upgrade the spreader, right? If you think about somebody that wants to accurately spread manure, as well as maybe some synthetics and for sure some biologicals, they needed to upgrade their spreader. Additionally, a shorter term goal was to add some grain storage. Again, if you're going to have a self-sustained crop and cattle system, you have to be able to kind of store feed between when it's harvested and when it's fed. Some longer term goals for this producer, they want to retire by the time that they're 55. So we're working towards that goal. And they also wanted to add some fence line bunks into their feedlot. And so I'll give you guys one more example of a young and beginning farmer that I work with. And their identity statement was actually, they wanted to take a trip to Florida with all the key teammates of the farm. And so the terminology there was some advice they had gotten was to build the tribe around your farm. Build that tribe around your operation with those key people that you can lean on for decision making. And really the idea here was that he wanted to have a good enough personal relationship with them that they would be comfortable going on vacation together. And so in the short term, had some goals to expand a bin site and also a goal to increase working capital. And then in the longer term, had a goal to purchase landlord's acres. And so this gives you an idea of kind of the difference there between those big picture operational goals, but also some really tangible things that we can work towards each and every year. And so we've talked about who's on your team. We've talked about setting those goals for the operation. And then the other piece that I wanted to hit upon is how do I now unify my team, right? How do I get everybody around the central goal? And what are some tangible examples of communicating across that team? And so I'll share some examples with you guys of things that I've come across in the past that have seemed to work really well. This is not by any means an inclusive list. There's plenty of other things that could be on here. And so the first example I'll give is shared access to livestock performance software. So there's a lot of people that feed cattle or run cows that run some sort of livestock analytics program. And so can you share access with other people that should have access? For example, does your nutritionist have access to that? Does your marketing consultant have access to that? And does that unify the whole team? Another really tangible example would be shared access to your marketing portal. And so in our case, everybody that we work with on the marketing side has a portal where they can log in and they can see what is my current cash flow? What is my marketing risk assessment? What is my production going to look like? Where are those sales at? What's my next steps in this marketing plan? And for a lot of producers, it might make sense to have other people see that as well. For example, should your lender have access to that? Maybe there's a spouse that should have access to that. Maybe there's a hired hand or an employee that should have access to that. And now we can all unify around that shared information. Another example would be to review key documents like cash flow, timing, and balance sheet with multiple teammates. And so your balance sheet and your cash flow aren't just something to check a box and then see them in 12 months. It should be a useful document that helps you make decisions and potentially helps those other teammates as well. For sure, your marketing consultant, maybe an agronomist, maybe a crop insurance agent that could utilize that information to help you make better decisions. Another example that's worked really well is to simply create a group text. And for example, you might have a group text with you, your marketing consultant, and your truck driver. To give you some examples, now if this is the case, as the marketing consultant, I can reach out directly to the truck driver to look at what those freight differences are between, say, the ethanol plant and the elevator, and decide where do we want to book our basis at. Okay, so that's a really easy way to keep communication across those teammates of the farm. Another example would be to have your agronomist share your input plans with your lender and with your marketing consultant. If there's somebody tied closest to those input decisions, those seed, chem, and FERT decisions, it's going to be your agronomist. And they should also be able to run that yield projection for you. And so can you share that information with your lender? Can you share that information with your marketing consultant so that everybody, again, is working around that same goal? Another example on the livestock side would be to ask your nutritionist to email projections to your marketing consultant. So as you're working with your nutritionist to determine what these rations are going to be and maybe what cattle you're going to purchase or not purchase, after that projection is run, can your nutritionist give that to your marketing consultant? So now you can work off of what are we shooting for and what's our marketing plan on these cattle or on these hogs. Another example would be to have your marketing consultant help value your inventory for your lender at renewal time. We polled a bunch of lenders here this winter and just asked them, what is the most challenging piece of updating a balance sheet? And almost unanimously, what we heard is that it's really hard to value inventory that's sitting in the grain bin. Because even if we know bushels, we still have to know, are there contracts on it? What type of contracts on it? Are there hedges on it? Are there options on it? And so that should all be information that your marketing consultant has. And so come renewal time, can your marketing consultant just work on that inventory number to share back with you and to share with your lender? And then finally, and maybe one of the most impactful ones that you could do, is ask one of your teammates on the farm to help create a peer group for you. And so if you think about on the farm, you work with, say, a lender or a marketing consultant or a crop insurance agent or an agronomist, they're going to have a lot of other producers they work with that could maybe they're peers and you have like-minded thinking and you guys can bounce ideas off of each other. Maybe they're mentors. Maybe they're people that are a little bit further along in their career or have tried some of the things that you want to try. And maybe those teammates can connect you with those individuals to help you improve your business that much more. And so again, this isn't an inclusive list. There's plenty of other examples that could fall under here, but there's plenty of examples to say, how do I now unify that team? How do I communicate across that team? I think oftentimes farmers maybe feel like they're playing a little bit of the middleman, right? Of passing messages between their lender and their crop insurance agent and that type of stuff. What I would challenge you guys to do is connect those individuals, make them all work as part of a team, and I guarantee that they're going to be willing to do so. And so to kind of come full circle with this and kind of recap what we talked about, after I gave you guys some examples of disjointed versus a unified team, we talked a little bit about establishing that team to support your business, right? Who is on my team? Are there any seats I'm trying to fill, or are there any seats that I'm trying to replace? Secondly, we looked at sharing your goals and identity statements, coming up with those operational goals and coming up with those financial goals for your operation. And then number 3, we talked about facilitating and encouraging communication across your team. Have I introduced my marketing consultant and my lender? Have I introduced my crop insurance and my accountant? Have I had all those people sitting around the team? And so to give some closing thoughts here a little bit, I'll leave you guys with this of what are your inflection point decisions? And so a lot of times people think about change on the farm and they think about big change and making ripples and things like that. What I want you guys to think about a little bit today is, can I make a 3% change? Can I make a really small change in how I make decisions that equal a really big impact down the road? And so if you're able to change your trajectory today, just 3%, that's a doubling effect over the next generation. And so think about ways you can do that. Think about ways you can make really, really small changes to the operation that have a really big impact down the road. And so I'm going to challenge you guys with a few of those things here yet today. And so a few years ago, I was sitting in a meeting and somebody told me, they said, the only way you know if you had an effective meeting is if you get people to take action after that meeting. And so I'm going to give you guys a couple examples of how you could make a 3% change to your operation that could equal a really big impact down the road. And so my first call to action for you guys, challenge number 1, is this summer, I challenge you guys to host one meeting with at least 2 key teammates sitting at the table. And so think about this. Over the course of the next 3 or 4 months, finding a time to meet with, maybe it's your lender and your marketing consultant both sitting at the table. Maybe it's your agronomist and your accountant both sitting at the table. Maybe it's your wife and your agronomist sitting at the table, or husband sitting at the table. And who are some of those other key teammates that should be at that table? So that's my first challenge for you guys, is to host one meeting this summer with at least 2 key teammates at the table. My second challenge for you guys to make a 3% change is to identify one measurable goal for your business and share it with 2 key teammates by this Friday. So that's 2 days from now, to come up with what's one measurable goal. What's one thing I want to achieve this year on my farm? And who do I need to share that with? Could I share it with my lender? Could I share it with my spouse? Could I share it with my employees? Could I share it with my marketing consultant? And so think about identifying that one measurable goal. And so again, we talked about making a 3% change, making a really small change that equals a really big wave down the road, right? That doubling effect by the next generation. And so these are 2 key ways that I was looking at to really challenge you guys in somewhat of an easy way, but yet a challenge to move that operation forward. And so with that, Rebecca, I will end up turning it back over to you for any questions that we do have.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bobby. Lots of really great information in here. We do have some time for Q&A, so be sure to submit those questions using the Q&A at the bottom of your screen there. It looks like we do have a couple that have come in. So Bobby, you kind of had the graphic with the different stakeholders and the different people who might be on your team. What's the best kind of starting point? Like, who's the first one you need to have in place, or does it matter, or kind of what's the best strategy for kind of getting started here?
So I think for a lot of producers, Rebecca, the natural one that typically comes first is a lender. It might be an FSA lender, it might be a farm credit lender, it might be your local bank. I think that's definitely a good place to start for people. Additionally, it seems like a crop insurance agent is also somebody that's going to be on your team. And so there's some of those that are just naturally on your team as you start. Accountants would probably fall under that as well. And so the challenge I would have for everybody here is think about who's already on your team. And if you're looking to add more people to that table. Honestly, Rebecca, I think this webinar series, if you go back and look at some of the past webinars, those are probably really good resources to start, whether that's a marketing consultant, maybe it's a transition planning person. And I think that's kind of a really good way, because what that tells you is the people that were involved in this series, they're willing to educate. They're willing to dedicate that time to teach you something and really help you improve your operation.
I think that sparks some additional questions in the Q&A here. I think this one's a little bit related, but who do you see most often excluded from that kitchen table that maybe should be there?
You know, I think one challenge that we've come across and really worked on in the past is if you are, let's say that you are operating your own individual farm and you're married and you have a spouse. Your spouse should very well be involved in those meetings. So think about if you have a meeting with your marketing consultant. Does it make sense? Maybe you have to have that meeting after 5 o'clock so that you and your spouse can both be involved there, because they should have a spot at that table, right? It affects them and they're going to be helping making those decisions as well. And so that's probably the one I see most often that should be included, is just that spouse.
Really great point, keeping people in the loop. Kind of building off of that, do you have any tips on bringing the spouse into the conversation? Let's say maybe they're not super involved in the farm or kind of resistant. Any advice there for kind of highlighting why it's important?
You know, so I've got to tell a little bit of a story. A couple of years ago, sat down with a producer. His wife is actually from Pennsylvania. She's very removed from farming, grew up in the city. And she actually, lender convinced her to sit down and talk with us about the marketing side. And we got done with the meeting and she told me, she said, I can't tell you how much I was dreading this meeting, but it makes so much more sense now. She's like, I now understand why this is important and things like that. And so I think extending that invitation to them, number one, but also explaining the importance of it, right? As a married couple, that's something that's going to affect both of you and it's going to affect your kids and things like that. And so regardless of the willingness to participate, they're going to have an influence on that. And so that's why I bring up the Can we do it somewhere that's easy, right? Can we come to your house? Can we do it after maybe they're off of work or things like that? Or can we do it over supper or something like that? I think there's multiple ways to kind of dip your toe in the water. What I would then caution though is be sure that if, say, you're meeting with your lender, that they're aware of what the agenda is. Maybe the agenda isn't so much about what's urgent now, but maybe the agenda is talking about some basics of why this is important to have everybody at the table.
Great advice there. Another one kind of maybe related to the family dynamic. Suppose you're coming back to the operation or taking on more responsibility, and there's maybe already a team in place that dad or grandpa has. Any advice for how I change my team? Should it be different? Can it be different? How to kind of navigate that family dynamic?
Yes, I think that's kind of a natural transition on the farm. Is I probably use dad's crop insurance agent because that's the first person that I was introduced to. That's not necessarily wrong, but I don't think that it's necessarily necessary that those teams be the same. And the reason that I say that is because every single person, even if it's father, son, or grandpa, grandson, every single person has a different skill set and a different way to communicate. And so you've got to find somebody that fits on your roster. Your roster may have a different need than grandpa's does or than dad's does. And so I wouldn't be afraid to just ask those questions of, hey, maybe there's somebody else you want to sit down with and interview to see if they maybe fit your roster a little bit better than dad's. I think dad's is always a great starting point, right? He's probably got some long-term relationships that you can start with, but then don't be afraid to explore what skill sets you need to bring to your piece of the operation.
Great. I think there's a little bit, maybe you've answered this somewhat, but
Sure.
any advice on kind of how often to kind of evaluate your team and possibly look for changes or taking people out? I think you were starting to get into that, but should that be an annual thing, a quarterly thing, every couple years?
I
It's
think,
probably not a right answer, but
yeah, I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think annual at a minimum, right? If you think about you're going to meet with every one of those teammates at a minimum one time per year. And so just thinking about, have my needs changed? It might not be so much that they're not great at what they do, but your needs as an operation might have changed, and that might need to disrupt a little bit of who is on that team. And so I think a good starting point is annually. There's some things that are maybe a little bit more urgent than that, right? You're probably talking to your agronomist a lot this time of year, your marketing consultant a lot this time of year. And so some of those might need more communication more than annually.
all right. Gosh, these questions are just building on each other. You guys in the audience are doing a great job. So kind of maybe a related question. What type of resistance are you generally met with when trying to connect different stakeholders? So do you ever run into members of the team that maybe don't gel, or there's some resistance in them meeting together? And how do you overcome that?
Yeah, so unfortunately that does happen from time to time. My typical answer is that we're all working towards the same goal, the goal of the farm. And so if we've got people on the team that aren't willing to unify around that goal, that might be a really good time to just ask a question of, is there somebody else that should have that seat on the team? And so I think of a really important one would be your marketing consultant and your crop insurance agent. Those two people need to communicate very well together because they're both kind of working in that same field. They're both important, but they need to have really good communication with each other in order to do the best job that they can for the farm. And so sometimes this needs to be farmer-led of, again, and invite them, right? Maybe I know that, hey, these two people, I wish that they would communicate better together. Can I host the meeting as the farmer and say, I'm going to invite my marketer and I'm going to invite my crop insurance agent to both come and sit at the kitchen table and make sure that we're all working towards that same goal.
Great points there. And that is kind of related to another question that's in here. Have you found good success in getting all stakeholders into the same room? So whether that's like a physical meeting or like you threw out a couple other ideas around like a group text or kind of ways to communicate virtually. I guess, do you have a recommendation in terms of kind of that face-to-face versus some alternative ways to keep in touch?
I'm a little bit old school, so I would prefer face-to-face to start, right? It's about building that relationship. We like to talk about the perfect team day one. Well, that's a dance. It takes some time to get there. And so focusing on baby steps, right? What's that 3% change I can make today? Maybe it's introducing my lender to my spouse. Maybe that's my 3% change for today, and then I can build on that. But I think face-to-face is always best first. And then if we add those other forms of communication to kind of continue that conversation, whether that's a group text, maybe it's a weekly Teams call or a Zoom call or something like that. Maybe it's an annual meeting at the farm. But I think you start small. Start with that 3% change and then build on that over time.
Another kind of different question here. I know you talked about the importance of having the team unified and working towards the same goal. Can you elaborate a little bit more when there are conflicting goals, like let's say between your marketer or your lender, different members of the team having kind of a conflict, maybe a story or something around how you resolve that conflict?
Yeah, so I think anytime that there is conflict around the goal, it's probably because people aren't equally informed. So there's a saying out there of two people equally informed seldom disagree. And so for some reason we're disagreeing because we're probably not equally informed. And so I think we got to go back to some of the assumptions of are we talking the same language? For example, when I'm talking to lenders, I know that they typically think in terms of balance sheet and cash flow. And so I'm gonna tweak my answer or how I'm going to communicate with them a little bit based on how I know they communicate. Crop insurance would be another good example of they're going to communicate just a touch differently. And so figuring that out. So maybe it's a little bit of a non-answer, Rebecca, but I think a lot of times if people are equally informed, we're all working towards the same thing. Ultimately, it's the farmer's operation, right? He's CEO. Now, we might be VP of marketing, you might have VP of lending or VP of insurance, but ultimately the CEO has to make that final decision of, hey guys, this is where we want to go as an operation.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and especially being really clear in your goal. I know sometimes we talk about SMART goals, so making things really specific and measurable, and you had some good examples in there. So it's not just growing the operation, but by how much and over what period of time. Probably the more specifics will cut down on some of those conflicts.
Correct. So kind of that conversation of operational versus financial goals. I could probably look at the list of guys I've met with, and I would say 95% of them have told me they want to purchase land. And so that's a goal that everybody just seems to have. But very few are able to actually break that down into what do I need to do this 12 months that move me towards being able to accomplish that goal long term. And so you're exactly right, getting more specific with it. We can have big overarching goals, but then let's lay out the steps. Let's make them specific and measurable and actionable and all those SMART goal types of things to make sure we're taking steps towards those big picture goals.
Great. I'll also throw in a shameless plug. We did have a webinar around this topic. It was called Working On versus Working in the Business. So for those of you who want to dig in more to goals, definitely go check that out in the episode archive. Some good information in there. I think I got a farm credit teammate on here because the question is, what's the best way for us as a lender to support your meetings?
So I think for us in general as the marketing consultant, there's a really close tie to lenders, right? We're going to communicate with them often and those types of things. And so what I see from the best lenders that I get to work with is really understanding that we're all working towards the same goal and we can all sit in the same room and have a really good conversation. And a lot of times if there's a challenge there, it's with that specifically, it's a lot of times an education gap. And so sometimes there's a need for just as a lender, maybe to support some education of, hey, maybe I bring in a group of producers that I just think really want to do a really good job, but they're maybe lacking some education. And so supporting events like that is always good. Additionally, what I've found from some lenders is feel free to reach out directly to some of those other teammates. I talk to lenders very regularly about producers that we both work with, and the producer knows that we're having those conversations to make sure that we're both preaching the same message and working towards the same goal. And so one professional that's really good about having some goals and some metrics is the lending team. And so making sure that the marketing consultant is aware of those as well. And so kind of that idea, I guess, of participate, make yourself available to have those joint meetings and sit at the kitchen table and provide your input and all that type of stuff is really good, but probably just participate and be present and reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out if you know that your producer has a marketing consultant on their team. That should be a benefit to have a good conversation and a good relationship with them.
I really like kind of your call to actions, Bobby, and the challenges that go along with it. I wish we had a better way to follow up with people. But if there's kind of beyond the challenges, something that you want to leave the audience with, kind of like one piece of advice to really stick in their head, what would you like to leave them with today?
Sure. So this is coming a little bit out of the questions here. Build a roster that's interested in your goals. Understand that you're the CEO of your operation and that you're allowed to have goals and things like that. And so really focus on building a roster that's interested in working towards those goals and helping you towards those goals. So if that's the one tagline I can leave you with, it's going to be that of build a roster that's interested in your goals.
Awesome. Well, we did have one more question come in. I think this is a juicy one. What if I don't really want all my partners in the same room? Any advice to still keep folks in the loop and connected, but maybe you don't want them actually all in the same room?
Yes, I think the challenge there is I'd have to ask a why question of what's the challenge or what's the risk of having them all in the same room. And so there probably is, but I can't necessarily name that. I take a pretty strong approach of you should want them all in the room, and if you don't, maybe we need to change out who's on that roster, because they should all be working towards your same goal. And if there's one thing that's gotten to be really, really important in ag production, especially, it's not so much about how hard you work anymore. It's about how well you can run a business. And nobody is perfect at running every piece of a business. And so we got to find those teammates that fill those gaps for us. And so I would challenge that one a little bit and just ask a why question of what is the risk.
Awesome. Good advice there, and probably a good place to end. I think we got all the questions. I want to thank you so much, Bobby, for joining us today. Really great information, a lot to think about here. I love the challenge number 1 and 2. I hope folks take that to heart and test it out. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks to the audience for really great questions and good interaction today. We are actually taking next month off because it coincides with the 4th of July. So we hope everyone has a happy and safe 4th of July. And we will be back on August 2nd. We'll be revisiting the topic of lease agreements. So if you recall, we talked about flex leases back in February, and we know we got the rental deadline coming up in September. So August 2nd, we're going to be talking about different lease structures. So you definitely don't want to miss that one. Thanks, everyone.